is the Prevalent Risk Governance Podcast, featuring conversations with today's top C-suite executives and practitioners who not only look at third-party risk governance, but push through the boundaries to protect data. Now, here's Prevalent CEO Jonathan Dembrot and third-party evangelist Brenda Ferraro.
Thank you for listening to Prevalent Risk Governance Podcast. We have a special broadcast today recorded at the Shared Assessment Summit at Pentagon City in DC. We were there the week of April 9th. And in this special episode, we will be talking to Brad Keller. He is the Prevalent Senior Director of Third-Party Strategy. We lean on him extensively for his legal background and his expertise in third-party risk governance. And he will be talking to us about GDPR. So Brad, thank you so much for sitting down with us. We're at the 2018 Shared Assessment Summit, and you won the Evangelist Award. Congratulations for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always good to do a lot of work that you love, but it's always better when you get recognized for it.
Everybody recognizes you for that, of course. So GDPR, it seems to be the buzzword at the summit. We've had 2 full days of workshops. Everybody's trying to understand, what do companies need to do to get ready for GDPR with the heels of May 25th, 2018 coming upon us. What would you have to offer the podcast on some steps to follow and or some thoughts to put at top of mind?
Yeah, that's a good question. And in fact, a lot of what I did a half-day workshop yesterday on regulatory issues. And GDPR was, of course, a big part of that. And I think the first advice that people need to follow is calm down.
Calm down.
Calm down. I know May 25th is rapidly becoming upon us. But running around with your hair on fire at this point is not going to help you address the things that you need to address. So it's really about, at this point, getting some scoping done. A lot of folks are very focused, and I think rightfully so, on what they need to do with their company. And there's a lot of work that a company has to do by way of data mapping and a lot of operational things that a company has to do to get themselves ready before they even look at their vendors. But when it comes time to look at your vendors, it's really about taking kind of the same approach of taking an initial scope and saying, I need to determine what my vendor's level of readiness is for GDPR. And when we think about GDPR readiness, there isn't anything in GDPR from an IT security controls that's new. All of the security controls that need to be in place are all things that we're used to dealing with. What's new with GDPR is data identity and data management and the operational processes to support that. So really what we're recommending, and we're on the throes of introducing into our solution the ability for companies to do this, is to take that initial pass and say, okay, what have my vendors done to identify and manage data consistently with the requirements of GDPR? And then secondly, have they put in place the operational processes that allow them to execute against those data management requirements? That's really the first pass. And once you've done that, you can then start going through what's otherwise a very familiar process of saying, okay, now that we know where the data is, we know what data you have, now let's make sure that from a security standpoint, you've got the right kind of technology controls in place.
I think that's a really good approach to it. People are probably, like you said, freaking out and not really understanding what is going to have to take place in order to be aware or the right readiness level. And with everything new, it's like a pendulum. Yes. You either over-process what you need to have done or you under-process. And there's a happy medium that you'll find. But I think the steps that you've mentioned is a really good approach to getting to a good start and an understanding to know what to do next as it evolves.
Well, and it lets folks sort of level set and frame set what they need to do next. And I think, unfortunately, early on and even today, people are just trying to jump right in and saying, I need to be GDPR compliant. And what's always sort of interesting is you ask them, well, what do you think that means? And they don't have an answer. So
What, they didn't read the regulations at night before they went to bed to find out exactly all those things?
no, only the oddball people like myself actually read all this stuff
I
in
do too.
excruciating
You're not
detail.
the only oddball.
So it's really about, take it step by step, layer by layer. The reality is we're all very worried about GDPR because the fines potentially are enormous. But the practical reality is, and sort of the insights that we're getting from some of our partners that are in the EU, is that they expect enforcement to take a fairly rational approach because they're not even sure how they're going to enforce it yet. But what they're going to be looking for are people who are taking a structured, reasonable, business-like approach to protecting privacy. So certainly early on, it's not as if on May 25th, everybody who's not in compliance is going to GDPR hell.
Right.
Okay.
There's no jail quite yet. There's
No.
just it's the technique of saying you're going to have a fine. There probably will be some type of sacrificial lamb at some point.
Yes. And we all can think of the Googles and the Facebooks and the Microsofts, and we got a pretty good idea who that's going to be. And the bigger you are,
But the more exposed.
and the more international your presence,
Right.
the more likely you are to be higher up the priority list.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that I'm advocating that people shouldn't take action. It's taking a measured response and realizing that your best first defense is that you've got a plan
Right.
that you're executing against, and that always comes with an initial level of scoping to decide where you have to go next.
Right.
So that's sort of the unofficial word we're getting is they just want people to be diligent. It's about, the phrase is privacy by design. So are you designing privacy protections along the lines the GDPR mandates into your processes?
That's an excellent way to think about it. Privacy by design. Are you designing in order to get to whatever that is that end state's going to be that everybody agrees upon, since it's been employed for us to do versus implemented?
And I think that's part of the challenge that companies are facing is they're not used to regulations that are heavy on process and short on other things. When the financial regulators came out with multi-factor authentication requirements.
Right.
Well, that was a very focused, very technology
Very
driven,
hard thing to implement. It
but
takes a long time.
It takes a long time, but it was very narrowly focused, and it was not so much about the process as it was about what kind of authentication should we use and how did we deploy it. It didn't require a massive data mapping. It didn't require massive operational process change. It was fairly focused. So I think, particularly in the States, we're more accustomed to addressing point-specific regulatory requirements.
Yeah.
As opposed to a requirement that has a global impact on whether it's our employees, our customers, our potential customers. It affects sort of every single component of our business potential.
Yeah. In a different way and or in the same way. It just depends, right?
Right. And just conceptually, I know we had the conversation during the workshops yesterday that we in the States tend to think of things as we have business data and then we have personal consumer types of data.
Right.
So that all that data that we use that's personally identifiable information, if we're using it in a business context, it's sort of carved out. We don't worry about it. The EU and GDPR doesn't make those kinds of distinctions. China doesn't make those kinds of distinctions. Very soon, Australia won't make those kinds of distinctions. I could go on, but people are going to start to tune out.
Hop-ons.
And I think it was interesting. Saw some very shocked looks yesterday during the workshop for people to realize, wait a minute, there is no distinction. If it's personally identifiable information, it doesn't matter whether I'm using it to further and execute my business relationship with my customers or my business partners, or I'm using it to market to consumers so they can buy the latest widget. those distinctions aren't made. And I think that has also been sort of a shock to the system, that there's not this carve-out of personally identifiable information that people need just to conduct business on a normal basis.
I think it's made a shift in the classification of that particular type of data.
Yes.
And everybody needs to learn how to adopt that in the way that's appropriate for what they've scoped.
Absolutely.
I agree. Well, thank you for sitting with us.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure, and I've enjoyed it tremendously.
All right. Enjoy the summit.
Thanks, I will.
Thank you for listening to the Prevalent Risk Governance Podcast. Connect with us on Twitter, Facebook, and visit us at prevalent.net. You can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts.